Welcome to Polaris-Live. I'm your host, Sarwar Kashmiri, and I appreciate your joining us for today's discussion in our series focused on the U.S.-China relationship and its global implications through the eyes of experts from around the world. This user-supported channel is brought to you live in collaboration with the Foreign Policy Association of New York. If you have questions, please feel free to submit them using the bar on the right-hand side of the screen. Additionally, you can listen to these programs as podcasts on your favorite platform. Thank you for being part of the conversation. My guest today is Vina Nadjibulla, Vice President, Research and Strategy, Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada. Vina leads APF Canada's research, education, network support activities. She spent a significant portion of her career working at the United Nations headquarters and in peacebuilding missions in West and Central Africa. She's a frequent and sought-after media commentator on geopolitics with a focus on India and China. Notably, she speaks English, Russian, and Farsi. Welcome to Polaris-Live, Vina Nadjibulla. It's so nice to have you with us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join your program.
I know how busy you are, especially at this juncture of the G7. But listen, Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, in his first big foreign and defense policy speech last week, declared that the United States' predominance on the world stage is, quote, a thing of the past, unquote. You agree?
Yes, absolutely. This has been a trend in the making for a number of years. And now there is a recognition that the unipolar moment that we enjoyed for the last 30 years is in fact behind us. What comes next, I think, is still unclear. So what will replace that unipolar moment is still in the making, but we're definitely in a different situation. And that's why Prime Minister Carney, I think, is engaging in a diplomacy that's a little bit different for Canadian prime ministers.
Even though America is the largest economy, the largest military power, you still think that dominance is now ending?
Well, it's all relative. Of course, yes, US is still the dominant power, but relatively speaking, China is now a near peer competitor. We also have other powers rising, India, Brazil, Indonesia. So yes, US is still quite important and obviously the largest economy, the most fierce militarily speaking, but other powers are catching up and the US does not enjoy preeminence in the same way that it did.
Now, even as you and I speak, Mr. Carney is still hosting one of the most important G7 meetings in perhaps the organization's history. Knowing Mr. Trump's distaste for a challenge to U.S. world leadership, Vina, do you think Prime Minister Carney's remarks may have played a role in his early departure?
I don't think so. I think in this time when President Trump left, he was very much noting that this has to do with the developing and escalating situation between Israel and Iran. Otherwise, he had a very good bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Carney. President Trump seems to have enjoyed the various interactions. He seemed to be in a good mood when we saw him at the family photo last night before the dinner and prior to his departure. So I wouldn't read anything into this. I think Prime Minister Carney has managed the dynamics with President Trump very well, both in terms of being able to have challenging discussions with him on tariffs and other things, but also keeping US still inside the G7 tent. And I think the statement that we saw coming out from the G7 on Israel, Iran is a testament to that the G7 still can issue things with one voice.
I think we are all still absorbing the news reports, Vina, but it does sound like for a change, Mr. Trump was able to change his mind from his original thinking when there were reports that he didn't want to sign and they changed the wording and then it became unanimous. That sounds like a pretty decent achievement of Mr. Carney's.
Yes, well, I mean, it's not going to be easy. I think the last 2 days, and then also what's still to come today will be important and are a test to Mr. Carney's diplomatic skills. And I think so far, you're right, he's managing it as well as can be expected.
Do you think that his term as a governor of the Bank of England, especially as he went through Brexit, when, if I remember reading correctly, his heart was not in Brexit, but he still had to manage affairs there, which he seems to have rather well, that experience holds him in good stead in meetings like this, Vina?
It does seem like he's comfortable on the world stage. He knows many of these leaders personally. He's worked with them before, as you mentioned, during his stints as the head of the central bank, both in Canada and the UK. And he seems to be very much in command and in control of the situation. We saw that in the opening remarks that he offered, to which media were present. I think this is very helpful in a critical moment that Canada finds itself with its relationship with the US, but also on the world stage.
We're in a different moment in Canada international relations. You mentioned, and I think the Prime Minister's mentioned, that Canada should approach diplomacy differently. What does that really mean, Vina? Differently?
Well, I think for the last 30 years, and actually even going back earlier, Canada was in an extremely privileged position. We are blessed in terms of our geography, having 3 oceans that have protected us until recently, having a friendly superpower to the south with a very large market, which was really helping in terms of our economic development and prosperity. So I think for a very long time, Canada could essentially engage on the world stage from a very comfortable, privileged position. That is coming to an end, both because of the types of threats that we're seeing. Oceans no longer protect you, and also because the US is no longer the sort of fully reliable partner that it has been until now. So with those dynamics changing, Canada now needs to up its diplomatic game, invest much more in its own defense and security, invest much more in its own diplomacy, build strategic partnerships, genuine relationships with others, not just in Europe, where historically we've had good relations, as well as, of course, through NATO, but also in the Indo-Pacific. And there's some progress that has been made in the last couple of years with the launch of the Indo-Pacific strategy. Canada is now recognizing that a lot of its prosperity and stability will also depend on what happens in the Indo-Pacific. So I think there are things that Prime Minister Carney can build on, but this is a moment where Canada really has to step up in a way that we haven't had to in the last few decades.
I find it very interesting, Vina, not just you, but other observers, when they talk about America today, mention that things are not the same as they used to be. America can't be supposedly relied on as much as people used to. That also seems to tell us, people who are listening to this, that America isn't about to go back to what it used to be. Is that how you see it?
Yes, I don't think we can go back in time. I think Prime Minister Carney mentioned something yesterday, that nostalgia is not a strategy, that we have to deal with the world as it is rather than as we wish it to be. So yes, I think we're moving forward. The question is what happens in the US after 2, 3, 4 years post President Trump potentially. So there's still lots of questions, but I think everyone agrees that we're not going back.
Do we know if anything substantial was accomplished at the G7, or is it too early to tell?
Well, the meetings are still ongoing.
Sure.
I think obviously, G7 is a platform which allows both for collective decision-making and frank discussions, but also important bilateral meetings. So the meetings that took place between Prime Minister Carney and President Trump, I think, were significant. We heard that Canada and the US will work towards a deal within the 30 days, so by middle of July. I think the meetings that happened between President Trump and other world leaders, notably Prime Minister of Japan, are also significant because Japan is also trying to get a deal as quickly as possible. We also obviously saw that discussions happen on Israel and Iran. That's important. And we'll see whether there are statements that Canada is able to negotiate on critical issues such as energy security, critical minerals, foreign interference, and potentially artificial intelligence.
But Vina, both the heads of Japan and Ukraine must have been a little bit disappointed, right, that Mr. Trump went off early, because I'm not certain they had a chance to really engage him. Am I right or no?
Prime Minister of Japan did have his bilateral. I think, of course, Ukraine, yes, there's disappointment that President Trump wasn't there for the breakfast meeting that was supposed to happen between G7 leaders and President Zelensky. Obviously, Australian Prime Minister also didn't get his chance to meet with President Trump. So yes, there's some disappointment that the face-to-face meetings that a number of both guests and members of G7 were counting on didn't happen. But a number of other important discussions did take place. And I think the fact that the meeting has happened without any major incidents is already a fairly big achievement.
Absolutely. So, do you think China should have been invited to the meeting?
No, this is a G7 meeting. China is a member of the G20, and obviously there are important discussions that happen in that forum. The next meeting will be in September with Brazil chairing. So I think, yes, G7 is not a forum where China has ever been invited, so I don't think there was any expectation that it would be for this time around.
But if, as Canada diversifies, India and China are two of the biggest pieces that need to be put in place. So would it not have been diplomatic and courteous to invite China as an observer, as other countries were?
So again, China has never been invited to the G7. I don't think there's any expectations of that. Canada can recalibrate its relationship and try to manage issues with China, notably around tariffs that are in place. Separately. There's no reason to do it in this format. And I think Prime Minister Carney has shown that. He had a phone call with Premier Li Qiang just last week. So I think discussions will continue on that to see how we can manage the very challenging and complex relationship we have with China.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you. So I'm asking once again about a remark that was made I think by Mr. Carney, but I'm not sure, that Canada has what the world wants, the values in which others aspire. What is it the world wants from Canada?
Well, I think what he was referencing was that Canada has energy resources. We're an energy superpower, both when it comes to conventional energy as well as materials important for the green transition, critical minerals in particular. Canada is also a major agri-food producer, and especially as the world needs more food security, Canada can play a role. But Canada is also an important actor when it comes to upholding free and open trade at a time when a lot of industrialized countries are stepping back, becoming much more protectionist, where economic nationalism is back. Canada still believes in rules-based trade, still believes in negotiating free trade agreements. Right now, we're negotiating free trade agreements with ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. We just concluded a free trade agreement with Indonesia. So I think Canada can be an important actor on the world stage. We have been historically, and I think that's what Prime Minister Carney is referencing here.
It really is amazing, and I think Canadians should be so proud that for so long Canada has punched above its weight and continues to do so. I think that's really heartening for those of us who are strong believers in Canada. But let me take a moment, please, to remind viewers that Polaris-Live is a commercial-free, entirely viewer-supported channel. We'd appreciate your signing up to our mailing list at kashmiri.com and to our YouTube channel, which is www.polaris-live.com. There's no cost, and it really helps us. We always welcome your comments on our video and podcast channels. So, Vina, going back now to a conversation with you, there's a strong consensus, which I'm sure you agree, that Canada now needs to diversify its economy from this heavy relationship that has existed with almost total reliance on the United States. What are the three top initiatives that you'd recommend to start this process, Vina?
Yes, you're absolutely right that there is now a recognition that our over-reliance and over-dependence on the US is not sustainable. Canada exports about 76% of its trade to the US, and that needs to change. I think for that to change, there are some critical things that first need to happen at home. And that has been, again, the priority of this new government, the idea of addressing interprovincial barriers, making Canada one strong economy rather than 13, because we have 13 provinces and territories. So all the things that you can do yourself, investing domestically in Canada's economy and making the country function much better from an economic perspective. It also means investing in export infrastructure, because in order to be able to take our products globally, we need infrastructure. For many years, the infrastructure was running north-south between Canada and the US, and now we need to be able to have the railways and the roads and the ports and the infrastructure to be able to get our products to the global markets. And then finally, we would need to deepen relations with markets where there's demand. So the Indo-Pacific, again, is a critical area because it's the fastest growing region of the world. There is a growing middle class, both in South Asia as well as Southeast Asia, that could use the products that Canada has. And of course, it also means deepening relations with our traditional partners like Japan, South Korea, and Australia that have already been important, both in terms of our energy partnerships, but also investments into Canada.
Is there a target? I mean, you can't just overnight diversify, right? It's a process that needs to take place. Is there a target that your organization and you especially have been thinking about? I mean, should it go down to maybe 50% of exports, 40% over time? And should this happen at a set number of percentage points every year, like maybe 10% a year? So after, 5 years, it's 50% less. Is there any thinking on that you can share with our viewers?
Sure. So we don't have an organization-wide target, but some of our senior fellows and scholars who are associated with the foundation have made a variety of proposals. One of them is, for instance, to increase internal trade. Canada's internal trade right now is about 1/3 of its total. So there's been proposals to increase that over 10, 15 years to 50%, and similarly to reduce the over-reliance on the US from 76% to maybe 50%, again, in a timeline of 20 or so years. I think what you're pointing out to, and I think what's important to note here, is that diversification and the reduction of that over-reliance isn't going to happen overnight, that this is going to be a long process in which we have to invest today, but for which we'll likely see benefits only 10, 15 years from now. But the process has to start somewhere, and I think that's where we are now.
I find it quite interesting that in some ways Canada and the European Union are kind of in the same boat. There's a very powerful editorial this morning about why the euro can become the second, in the Financial Times, but why the euro can become the second strongest currency. And they point out various percentages and so on that exist. However, there is also the recognition that the internal barriers of the EU may keep that from happening. So as an example, there is still no fiscal connection between the strategies of the countries. There are internal barriers to flows. It sounds like Canada is kind of dealing with the same issues, right, Vina?
Well, yes and no. Of course, European Union is made up of 27 nation states. In the case of Canada, we are a federation, and there are interprovincial trade barriers and issues that can be addressed. And certainly the new government and Prime Minister Carney have made that a priority. He's in fact committed to removing all federal barriers to interprovincial trade by July 1st. And then there are initiatives happening at the provincial level to further reduce those barriers. So again, I think this is something that will take time. There are regulatory issues that would need to be addressed through provincial legislation and so forth. So that will take time. But I think it's an important recognition that, again, in the case of Canada, our over-reliance on the US, where each province trades far more with the Americans than inside Canada, is unsustainable.
I'm going to switch for a moment to the defense issues. Canada has committed now to increasing its defense budget to 2% of the economy. Is this largely because of NATO requirements, or are there threats on the horizon that are being seen by Canadian strategists? Can you shed some light on that?
Yes, so the 2% of GDP for defense spending is a commitment that was made by NATO members, and Canada,
Yes.
of course, is a member of NATO. This commitment goes back to 2014, so it's about time for us to meet that, and it was a welcome development that Prime Minister Carney announced that we will hit that 2% target by the end of this fiscal year. So but again, it's going to be a long process that requires an additional $9.2 billion in spending. So we'll see how the procurement issues and ways of spending that money actually materialize. But it was an important political announcement and a signal that Canada is ready to up its spending on defense and be a reliable ally in NATO. But also, it's important in Canada's relationship with the US. As you know, President Trump has made that a big priority. He's pushing all allies in Asia and in Europe to spend more on their defense. So both before this G7 meeting, but also before the NATO summit meeting that's happening next week, it was important for Canada to meet the 2%, or at least to announce that it would meet the 2% this year.
Yes, and along the same lines, your thoughts on Canada paying the U.S. to defend it with the Golden Dome shield, as Mr. Trump has offered? How does that fit into what's going on now? And I realize these are very early days, Vina, but I just wanted to throw that out to you.
Yeah, so we still obviously don't know exactly what the discussions around the Golden Dome are about and the details of that. We know that there are some conversations. In fact, that's part of this comprehensive trade and security deal that Prime Minister Carney and President Trump are discussing. So I think what we do know is the Canadian government has indicated that they're open to discussing this, because obviously continental defense through NORAD will be impacted by this. So Canada needs to be part of the discussions because we do share the continent with the US. But in terms of how much Canada would need to contribute, both from the dollar figure, but also in any other way, we still don't know.
And now I'm going to ask you, as we start running into the tail end of my conversation with you, I'd like to ask you, if you had a few minutes privately with President Xi Jinping and President Trump, what would you whisper to them privately to improve their relationship, which obviously impacts Canada, India, all the countries in the world? What might you tell them?
Oh, I'm not sure I'm the best person for that. I think with President Trump, my advice or the comment that I would make would be very much about the fact that his policies, while they might be coming from a good place in terms of trying to put forward things that will make middle class and Americans more prosperous and better. I mean, I think this idea that US needs to put its own people first makes sense. However, the way that he's implementing them is actually counterproductive and is reducing US soft power, is reducing US image and trustworthiness on the world stage, and ultimately is undermining US competitiveness vis-a-vis China, but also other adversaries. So I think while it's understandable why he might be trying to rebalance global trade, why he's trying to get allies to contribute more to his defense, this is all understandable, but the way that the administration is going about doing that is significantly harming US credibility, US image, and US soft power. So that's counterproductive. and in some ways is a gift to the adversaries and strategic competitors like Xi Jinping and others. If I were to speak with President Xi, the conversation would be very much about noting that if China, in fact, is interested in a reset or a new and different and better relations with Canada, then there needs to be a change in behavior when it comes to foreign interference, when it comes to transnational repression, when it comes to how China is behaving in the region in terms of Canada's partners like Philippines and others. So it's essentially a message that there needs to be some change in behavior, not just tone and words that are being said.
Well, I do hope you get a chance to talk to both of them in the way that you've described. Those are brilliant suggestions. I'm going to give you the last word. Vina, Americans and Canadians have been cousins, brothers, sisters, whatever you want to use. There's such a close affinity between the two. What message would you broadcast to Americans at this point who are just so disappointed with some of the issues that are taking place? Longtime residents in Florida are returning back, not as many visitors. It's disheartening to a lot of people like me who just have this close association with both countries, hundreds of thousands of them. What would you give them a word of encouragement?
I think what's encouraging to me and what gives me hope is that Canada-US relations is one that's built on many, many years of friendship at every level, not just government to government, but people, businesses, provinces and states cooperate. So there's a lot of connectivity. There's a lot of resilience in this relationship. And I'm hoping that notwithstanding the crisis that we're going through right now, that we'll be able to find our way back to a relationship of trust and mutual benefit, because ultimately Canada and the US really benefit from having each other as neighbors and allies and partners. And while we're going through a difficult patch, I hope that there will be ways to rebuild that relationship.
Well, Vina Nadjibulla, we have alas run out of time. Thank you so very much for that thought-provoking perspective. I do hope you'll come back and see us again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to our viewers from around the world. Please join us again on Polaris-Live.com as we continue to explore the most consequential relationship in the world, that between US and China, and its impact in the world through the eyes of experts from countries around the world. Until next time then, goodbye.